Nebraska medicine, like Mariah said, and I work specifically with the oncology population. But this is a topic near and dear to my heart because I follow a gluten-free diet because I was diagnosed with gluten sensitivity. So I have a little bit of personal experience with this.
And I'm Morgan. Thanks for joining. I am basically kind of the same pathway as Sam, even though we didn't know each other until we were in our internship in our master's program. But I currently work with the inpatient family medicine, cardiology, and vascular surgery patients. And so I don't personally have follow a gluten-free diet, but I help educate patients. And then I also have gluten-free friends.
Yep, you live with a gluten-free person.
True. All right, so just briefly again, just a review of those sources of gluten. So wheat, which can be like bulgur, couscous, graham, spelt, like the wheat germ, wheatgrass, durum, all those other types. Barley often can be used as a thickener in soups and stews, which is mindful when looking at different labels. And then all those other syrups, and then also rye and oats. Oats are not considered safe unless labeled gluten-free. All right, and then just going into this like labeling products. So this you might have seen on products. So the FDA says that products can be labeled gluten-free if it has less than 20 parts per million of gluten. There are also other third-party companies that provide certification for gluten-free foods, which is these images here. So one of these organizations is the Gluten Free Certification Organization. It's a nonprofit that provides consumer support, advocacy, and education. It operates as a third-party certification program for gluten-free vendors. So the label on the left is their old label, and then the label on the right is the one that they are transitioning to. And this trademark was created to help identify gluten-free products. So products that have this label, they can have this label if they do not inherently contain gluten, such as like carrots, or if they don't contain the known gluten sources, like I reviewed before, the wheat, barley, rye, or any of those hybrids, and also if it meets the threshold of less than 20 parts per million. And then that's, if there is possible cross contact in a facility, then it must meet that less than 20 parts per million. So when thinking about that 20 parts per million and what that means, so that means if I have 1 million marbles and 20 of them are red and the rest are blue, I could describe the red marbles as 20 parts per million. And so foods also can still be gluten-free without having the label. So for example, you know, like the inherently gluten-free foods, like most fruits and vegetables, if it's not labeled as gluten-free, just, you know, making sure that it doesn't contain any of those products or any gluten-containing products by reviewing the ingredient label list. Next on labels, there's also an allergy statement. So it's going to say whether or not it contains the big 8 allergens, which would be wheat, soy, peanuts, milk, tree nuts, seafood, fish, and eggs. So usually under the ingredients, you'll look and see, and it'll say contains wheat or contains soy. So that's also a good place to check and see right away, okay, this contains wheat, so I will not be taking that.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about reading the actual ingredients part of the label. So looking at this label that's on the screen, you can see some of the sources of gluten in this specific product. And so you'd want to be looking for some of those sources that Morgan shared and reviewed on that earlier slide. So on here, you can see that wheat flour and malted barley flour are listed on here, which would both be gluten-containing sources. So those are just 2 examples of kind of what you might be looking for when you're reading for those ingredients. The bottom red circle shows the statement regarding if a product was made on equipment shared by any of the big allergens. So this could also include wheat. So it could, instead of saying like it says on the screen, it says manufactured on equipment that processes peanut milk, it could say wheat there instead. So what happens when a package says it's gluten-free and also states it's made in a facility or factory that processes wheat? So the FDA does actually allow this because they're actually voluntary statements to put on the product. But the gluten-free definition really does trump that advisory claim regarding processing. So they're required to still meet the same standard, less than 20 parts per million of gluten. So, when in doubt, leave it out, but these products should be safe since they're still required to meet the less than 20 parts per million definition. Okay, so we also wanted to make sure we touched on non-food sources of gluten because this is something that's frequently forgotten about. There can still sometimes, these can definitely still be something that impacts someone, especially if they, have celiac disease. So it's important to make sure, that we note this. Some common hidden sources of gluten can include things like cosmetics and beauty products. It's important to make sure that you're reading the labels of these products, which look sometimes pretty similar to the ingredients labels on foods. They may not have the same advisory claims though, but looking at that list and really seeing if it does contain gluten. Medications can also be another hidden source of gluten. Again, reading the label is important. You may see some of these products, both medications and cosmetics, that do say gluten-free on them. An example of this would be I've actually seen NyQuil bottles that say gluten-free on them. So it's something that you can sometimes look on the back of the bottle and see it labeled as gluten-free. And if you don't, again, reading through that medication list and the ingredients portion and seeing if any of those gluten-containing ingredients are listed there. Okay, so what to do when you're unsure? Well, one option is to call the manufacturer. They should be able to tell you if a food does contain gluten. And if it does, then that's something to avoid. But at the end of the day, if you're still uncertain, if you followed all these steps, if you've looked at the, processing statement, if you've looked at the advisory claims, if there's no gluten-free label, and if you're unsure about the ingredients, when in doubt, leave it out. It can sometimes just be the safest option if you're still uncertain after looking through all these different parts. So next we wanted to take a minute and kind of practice. I know that, a lot of us could be looking at nutrition labels already, but if you want to take a peek at these labels on the screen and we'll give you maybe like a minute or so to kind of look over the ingredients of both, and then we can talk about, any sources of gluten you might find in either. So I'll give you about a minute. Will we be able to see the chat?
Is it up there? One of the more.
Perfect. I think it's been about a minute. So looking at the label on the left, the red label, either in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself briefly, any sources of gluten that you see in that label? Yep. So the big one here, yep, is in the first few. It says enriched wheat flour. So that would definitely contain gluten. And this is, I don't know if you
Yeah, this is a Twizzlers because me, being a gluten-free friend and not having as much experience. I was like, Twizzlers are just sugar. Like, they're fine. There's no gluten in them. And then you're like, nope, there's the third ingredient is wheat. So it's definitely good to be mindful of.
Yeah, I was actually 17 when I found out that gluten was what I was having issues with in my diet. And I remember it being one of the things I was the most surprised about, actually, because I used to eat Twizzlers all the time, but I feel a lot better not now. So yeah. Okay, and then how about the white label, the other one? Any sources of gluten in there? Yeah, so so on this one, this would be considered gluten-free. You don't see the exact gluten-free, certification on here. Sometimes it's actually on the front of a package versus the back. It's not always necessarily in the exact same spot. But yeah, some hints here, you don't see any in the ingredients label or in the ingredients list. You don't see anything that, says wheat, barley, rye, or, non-gluten-free oats in there. And then at the bottom, you can also see for, that allergen advisory statement, it just says contains eggs and it doesn't talk about wheat at all there. So that's sometimes a good place to start and everything. So yeah, this does not have anything that contains gluten in its ingredients. So, all right. Any questions about all of that? Yeah.
Have you guys ever have any other examples of things that you think should be gluten-free, but you found that they actually contain gluten?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Sweet tart ropes are kind of like Twizzlers. So yeah. I don't know if I've ever looked at those. That's a good one too. Yeah, soy sauce surprised me as well. Have you found good alternatives to soy sauce? Oh yeah, being careful about rice. Yeah. And there sometimes are gluten-free soy sauce. I have, yep, that's the same one I use too. Yeah, lots of cereals are surprising. Some of them do definitely surprise me. You think like, oh, like Mariah's example, corn pops, it's made out of corn, but when you pay more attention to it, there's definitely some of those gluten containing ingredients in there as well. Twizzlers was definitely the big one for me, I think, when as well as, quite a few other candies too. Yeah. Licorice. Yeah. I also was surprised I don't know if anyone eats veggie burgers, but wheat is used a lot in veggie burgers as well. So that's one that definitely surprised me too. I'm a big veggie burger eater. So I've had to go and find brands that have either the certification in them or, don't contain any gluten. I haven't heard anything about there being issues with the gluten-free label. Have you?
I haven't for Cheerios specifically. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or comments about it.
Mariah, have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, there's been some, things in the news that saying that their processing procedures aren't as strict as they should be, even though they are testing still, usually at that less than 20 parts per million to be labeled gluten-free. They still, the sorting process may not be as rigorous as people would like, is my understanding. I don't know if Shelley or Megan have any more comment on that.
I think Megan does, because she's got a buddy who works for them.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of one of those things where when you get such a large corporation trying to produce so many Cheerios, I kind of like work around what we're doing and basically try gluten-full oats and sort them to the point where they felt like they were then gluten-free. And I think what people have learned is that it really should be for someone with celiac. I don't know if that necessarily pertains to people that have gluten sensitivity, but I think the general consensus from people, and I'm going to reference Trisha Thompson, the celiac dietitian that does a ton of research. She is just really, she doesn't believe in their process, and their batches are so large when they do their testing for the parts per million that, yeah, maybe they're passing, but there's hot zones in those batches and they're potentially making people ill. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence in the celiac community that people cannot tolerate them. I do not eat oats anyway, so I have not tried them, but I do know that there's been a lot of people that I personally know that also have found issues with them. And that goes for not just Cheerios, but also Lucky Charms, which, man, if I could have a bowl Lucky Charms again, darn it, that'd be great. But so I would just, that's kind of a proceed with caution. Everybody has to be kind of their own personal advocate in that respect for their decisions. But it's definitely it's not a perfect situation. I think if you, as a celiac, understand that they're actually starting with oats that are not grown in gluten-free fields, like the gluten-free labeled oats that you would buy at the store, and that they're using kind of a high-tech sorting method to try to get rid of the barley and get rid of all those cross-contaminant gluten-full grains. I think if people really knew that, they would maybe be much more hesitant. But unfortunately, there's just not as much information out there unless you're seeking it. So that's my take. Sorry, that was long.
That was good. Yeah. That was new information for me too. I haven't had Cheerios in a very long time, but that's good to know.
Something that I've come across that with labeling is like with alcohol, it'll say processed to remove gluten. And again, it's kind of like starting with the oats and then, trying to get them gluten-free. Probably not the safest choice for those who are celiac or even gluten sensitive to, have a process where they started with a gluten-filled substance and then try to remove it. So, because people want their gluten-free beer, but there are gluten-free beer options. Yes, they are expensive, but safer ones than the ones that are processed to remove gluten. Any other,
That's kind of an interesting topic, because that, I was just going to add to that, Shelley, a little bit with the, it's interesting for people to know that like FDA labeling doesn't necessarily apply to alcohol. So it's the TTB, the Bureau of Tobacco and whatever, that governs that. And so their rules are different. And so you really do, it's always good to do your research and be educated. And if you're shopping at Hy-Vee, ask your dietitian if whatever you're looking at is actually gluten-free or if it is derived from an original gluten-containing grain, because that's always something that can trip up people, especially if they're early in their journey with celiac. So.
And Megan, that makes me think about meat products. USDA products don't have to follow the gluten-free labeling law as well. But when you see on meat products a contain statement, then you know they're voluntarily complying. So that's just kind of an interesting caveat with meat. So you can ask your butcher, which of your meat products, are not injected with solutions, and, get to know your meat department. And I always recommend to kind of avoid frozen foods that aren't labeled gluten-free, because they may not tell you what's in that solution that's been injected into them to help them kind of stay fresh. So you inject a frozen chicken breast with solutions to help them stay better when they're frozen.
Looks like someone asked, what's the name of the author that was mentioned, the one who has no faith in General Mills' sorting process? Who is that person?
I'm going to add that quick here. I'll take care of that.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I'm so glad you brought up medications, because that is such a real problem, and so many new people diagnosed with celiac don't know. It's just a big shock to them that gluten can be in their medications.
Yeah, and kind of like with the manufacturer, being able to call them if like you're unsure, or talk to the pharmacist if they have any knowledge with it, that kind of stuff too. I was surprised the first time I looked at the back of one of my medications and it said gluten-free on it, and I was like, I really appreciate that, like, at least people are like starting to pay attention to that.
Yes.
I feel like I've noticed that more.
Well, and isn't it interesting that a lot of the generic brands have gone that way? But yet, like Tylenol and Advil don't label their products as such. But like if you go to Target or Hy-Vee, a lot of times those generic brands will be labeled gluten-free. So I do always I look for that always. And I will also say that I have a prescription I get from Hy-Vee, and when my doctor puts it in, they actually request a celiac level check on the test, and they make sure that in the pharmacy department they use clean trays and clean counters. So that's something that, like, the more education we can get out in our community, the better. So I would highly recommend, if you have a pharmacy you use, to go ahead and make that request, because it's not only is it good for the pharmacy to be aware of the issue, but Hy-Vee will always they'll wait like almost 24 hours and just double check and then call you back to make sure everything is good. So I can't say enough about their service and their pharmacy department with that. They've been amazing. I don't think I'll ever fill a prescription anywhere else.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I think I'll just tag on, speaking of medications, the Gluten and Medication Disclosure Act has still not been passed. And if that is something that you want to support, many celiac websites like the National Celiac Association have like template letters that you can send to your representatives that can help support that bill being passed, to make sure that medications are required to label if they contain gluten. So that is some active legislature that you can be a part of. Little plug. Any other questions? Been some great discussion this evening. I really appreciate Samantha and Morgan for being here. If you guys do have any questions after, feel free to email us at gfomaha@gmail.com, and we can definitely point you in the right direction, get you the information that you need for sure. We've appreciated everybody's time and attention. And I think Megan has a kind of a final announcement for our next and final planned Zoom meeting.
Okay, so the December meeting is going to be about restaurants, which this whole COVID thing has added a whole nother twist of complexity to that for not only everyone, but also people that are looking for, special dietary requirements. So we'll talk a little bit about selecting the restaurants that you eat at, choosing specific menu items on their menus, speaking with managerial staff and the kitchen if needed, and how to bring up those conversations and be powerful and vocal in your needs and what you need at how you need to be serviced at that restaurant. And we'll also talk about some of our Omaha favorites. So I'll have kind of a list of some of my tried and trues, and we'll talk through some of that. That's obviously a little bit anecdotal in experience with everyone, and it varies, but I tend to be more on the cautious side, but I do have a couple places that I will go on occasion. So we'll talk about kind of how the Omaha landscape compares to other cities and maybe what we could do as a community to try to better that. So that'll be December. And I'm hoping I've got some leads on some gift cards that we'll give away. So I'm hoping that we'll have that in the queue to work on as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Megan. That's exciting. Something to look forward to. I'm sorry, I'm just checking the chat. We were just asking, how did you learn about the meeting? And it looks like email is a good way. So we will make sure that we keep on those email reminders for our next meeting in December, December 15th, I believe. Shelley, is that correct? Megan, is that correct? Yes, December 15th at 7 p.m. We will be posting the Zoom links again in the email and on Facebook. So follow us on Facebook at Omaha CSA on Facebook. All right, if there are no more questions, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated Samantha and Morgan for coming and providing us with such great information. Thanks, everybody.